Good late afternoon, early evening. Welcome here for a panel on the governance of quantum computing. I'm Joris van Hoboken. I'm a professor of law at the University of Amsterdam, based at the Institute for Information Law. And I have a professor of law at the Vrije Universiteit Brussels. I'll be moderating this panel. We have a rather stellar lineup, so you can be happy to be part of the select few who made it here. And we'll get a bit of an explainer about what is quantum computing and really what to think of that, what are realistic expectations with respect to quantum computing, something you've maybe seen in media reporting about, or maybe some of you are actually experts in this and want to hear, be part of the conversation about where is this going, what are some of the use cases, that could be, really interesting for quantum computing. And also based on that, like the applications, what are some of the governance challenges in relation to this new form of computing, that people are working on to bring into this world. So we have a fantastic panel. We'll start off with Matthias Streuer, who is a technical fellow and corporate vice president of quantum at Microsoft. We will have, as a second speaker, we will have Marieke Hoed, who is the executive director of the Impact Translator at the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator, GESDA, based in Geneva. Then we have Christian Schaffner, who is a professor in theoretical computer science at the University of Amsterdam and the director of QSoft, also based in Amsterdam. And then finally, we have Aparna Surendra, who is a manager at AWO, like a research, think tank type of outfit based in London and Brussels. So with that, I'd like to hand over the floor to our first speaker, Matthias Streuer. And we would like to get the slide deck up and running for that. But the floor is yours. So maybe just one logistical remarks, like what we're going to do is we'll have some opening remarks, like opening presentations from the speakers. After that, we'll have a little bit of back and forth and discussion, but we'll also hand it over to, to the audience for questions and discussion at some point. So, thanks everybody for coming, and the floor is yours, Matthias. Yeah.
Thank you for the invitation to come here. When we want to talk about the governance of quantum, then first we have to understand what the applications are. And when you look at the news, then quantum will solve everything. Quantum is the wishing well that can solve all your problems. And the most the extreme case is once I heard that there's a problem where the scientists don't understand it, they don't have the data, they don't have a theory, so quantum computing will solve it. What is real is that there's this big maze of applications, from curing cancer, solving the weather problem, climate change, everything. But when you look closely, a quantum computer is a very complex machine, so every operation is much slower than on a classical computer. And in order to beat the classical computer, thus, it has to do far fewer operations. That means, first of all, it has to be a small data problem, because by the machine being more complex, loading data is more complex, and big data is an even bigger problem. Then it needs to be a problem where quantum computers have an exponential advantage. When you then apply that filter to the maze, what remains is essentially, so that doesn't build here, what remains is just the lower part. What remains is the only applications are applications in chemistry and material science. Now, when I say that, then many people say, oh, so a quantum computer is only useful for chemistry. That's disappointing, because I thought I would work on quantum computing because it will change the world. But then we know that 96% of all goods manufacturers rely on chemistry and material science. So it impacts everything we make. It impacts every person on the planet, because it impacts all of the SDGs. And if we can build a quantum computer to help us advance chemistry and help us design new chemicals and materials, that's a huge breakthrough. That really helps with climate change due to capturing the carbon from the air. It helps with food security, with making fertilizer, healthcare, and so on. So it has a big impact. But where are we? In order to get there, we need to get to what we call level 3, a scaled, fault-tolerant, reliable quantum computer. Most machines right now are level 1, small and noisy. We just got a breakthrough. We have the world's first reliable qubit. That's 800 times better. So we're slowly moving into level 2. We'll have to get to level 3. That will need about 1 million qubits to get there. So it's still 5+ years out. But as we prepare for that, as we think about what it will do, we start to think about how do we deploy it in a way that is safe. So how do we deploy it and how do we mitigate the risks without stopping the good applications? And that's where my main point here is for that. I mentioned one application, I mentioned chemistry. That is the commercial application. But there's another consequence of quantum, namely the same machines we built for chemistry will also break our current year public key cryptography. But the way to mitigate that is not to control quantum computing and say we cannot export it, we cannot build it, but the way to control that is to mitigate the risks. So on the quantum side, what we have to do is we have to harden our crypto, and that's what will be now talked about, and then the quantum specific risk is mitigated. So in some sense, mitigating the risk of quantum is easy. We harden our crypto. But I said the main commercial application is towards chemistry. And chemistry is intrinsically dual use. Any chemical, any material can be used as a tool or a weapon. And as we thus advance the developments in chemistry, we have to think about kind of how do we govern that. So as we build new tools that accelerate chemistry research and that can be used for good or for bad, how do we control that? But that's a problem that is not quantum specific, because we're making big progress there already today with HPC, supercomputing. We're making big progress with AI. We have AI models that accelerate chemistry research a millionfold, and quantum will come in and will make it more accurate. So it's a problem that's not 5 years out, it's a problem we have today. How do we govern the dual use aspects here? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Could I just ask you, like you're quite clear. I mean, on the one hand, there is the Shor algorithm,
Yeah.
you know, breaking crypto, and we'll hear later also about like how to address that, or what is happening also to address that risk. You're also speaking about like the main application area being like the quantum simulation, you know, the use of computers for simulating materials, properties of molecules, and things like that. Could you say a little bit about like just like what is the kind of time horizon where you expect these things to really, you know, become impactful?
The impact we have in that space with AI is today. We accelerate the increased research now there. We found the new, better electrolyte, the new coolant in just weeks instead of years of research with the AI. So that's a big breakthrough now that we accelerate, we democratize the access to it. Quantum computing will make these models more accurate, more predictive, but the impact of technology of computing in chemistry is today, so we should think about it now. The impact of quantum computing will come in 5 years or 10 years, but the governance challenge is here today.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much for that. So with that, I think we can move to our second speaker, Marieke Hoed. Maybe we can get back to the slide deck. And thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I'm Marieke Hoed. I'm coming from GESDA, the Geneva Science and Diplomacy Anticipator. And so, as you can hear in the name, our take on the governance of quantum computing is a science diplomacy angle. So what that means is what we have been exploring with GESDA is how the multilateral governance could be activated or should be activated to ensure that future scientific breakthrough will benefit all in the best possible way. So when we speak about multilateral governance, what that means in practice is how can we work with or activate UN organizations. So like, for example, ITU, UNESCO, OECD, others of the kind. But we also work with nation states through their representations to the UN. In Geneva, of course, we're based in Geneva, but our scope is global. So we do also interact with nation states representations to the UN in New York and in other UN hubs like Nairobi, for example. The mission of GESDA is not strictly focused on quantum computing. We actually, the reason why GESDA was created is to help better anticipate the future scientific discoveries, of which quantum is one, that will translate into technologies that will then impact mankind, and to activate diplomacy, so the multilateral diplomacy, to ensure that the benefits of those technologies will not be reserved to happy fews, but will actually benefit the majority of humanity. So that's the mission, that's the ambition. GESDA covers 40 domains, but quantum, the reason I'm here really is to talk to you about the Open Quantum Institute, which is a program that was initiated by GESDA with the support of a multi-stakeholder task force, which included, of course, industry, but diplomats and philanthropic organizations, UN organizations. And Matthias has been and is still the chair of GESDA's quantum task force. So he can also share at least as much as me about the Open Quantum Institute. The objective of the Open Quantum Institute is to anticipate the coming of age of the technology. So if we say 5-10 years, how can we work now to develop this technology in a more inclusive manner, but also to ensure that its potential is leveraged for all the challenges and global challenges that humanity faces, and not just those domains where there's an immediate geopolitical advantage. And so what you see here on the slides is the 4 pillars on which OQI is active. I will go very quickly on those 4 pillars so I can concentrate on the last bit, which is more the governance aspect of it. But OQI has a first pillar, which is about exploring those applications, the useful applications where quantum will actually bring an advantage that can help with the Sustainable Development Goals, so the UN 2030 agenda and beyond. Like we mentioned, climate change is one key area of exploration. Second one is public health. We're looking at applications, especially at the moment around antimicrobial resistance, so discovery of new antibiotics, where humanity has been stalled for the past 10 years, 20 years. And also, of course, very important in the current times is food security. With UN organizations like the World Health Organization, of course, but also the World Food Programme, the FAO, and so on and so forth. So there, it's about proposing challenges to quantum scientists to explore and where they can actually create maximum impact for their discoveries. The second key element of the Open Quantum Institute is a matter of access, so broadening access to the technology so that everyone in the world can experiment and submit their challenges. So OQI works with private companies, those that have quantum computers available through the cloud. Those companies, including Microsoft, but also IBM, AWS, Pascal in Europe, and Oxford Quantum Circuits, for example, IQM, are donating time on their machine for Open Quantum Institute to redistribute to researchers, entrepreneurs from quantum underserved geographies to use the machines, train themselves, but also look at how their local communities could benefit from the technology. There's an education component also to OQI, but the reason I'm here, I guess, today is to talk to you about how we are activating multilateral governance to ensure that quantum computing is leveraged for the SDGs. So what JESDA and OQI have been doing for the past 24 months is we have curated a group of 25 to 30 nation states so that we are curating this discussion around big topics that are relevant to the multilateral governance in order to anticipate what the future multilateral governance of quantum computing should look like. So responsible use, of course, very important to be talking about chapters around security and safety, but also other topics like how to ensure that we're not widening a digital divide with quantum computing, trade and supply chain issues, environmental impact, and so on and so forth. So that's the product that came out of those discussions. The nation states have wished that we publish the conclusions or the main highlights of this work in this report, which is available on the Open Quantum Institute work. And happy to speak about all of this longer during the panel discussion. Thank you.
Maybe just as a little follow-up question before we move on to the next speaker, could you say something about, from your experience, you've worked also on other scientific developments and other types of technologies, what like really stands out as more kind of unique in the quantum space? Like how, could you say something about that from your experience in the last years?
Yeah, I think here what's unique, or at least much more, critical in quantum computing is that the technology is actually in the hands of a very few stakeholders, whether it's private stakeholders, private industry, or nation states. So there's a very critical question is how do we onboard geographies, nation states, that do not have the quantum capacity on their soil, but still will be impacted by the technology because some of the critical sectors of their economy could be transformed by quantum computing. So that's where we are kind of in a strange situation where the technology is not here. It could have a massive impact on critical sectors of the economy. At the same time, it's not yet mature. So there's an interest in theory, but we also need to take the time to create a multilateral governance in a more like serene context than if we're faced with brutal changes in supply and value chains, so of countries that have quantum capacity, again, but also countries that do not have it.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. And we'll get back to that theme also later on in the panel. But now I'll hand it over to Christian Schaffner for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Joris. So I'm a professor in theoretical computer science at the University of Amsterdam, actually a colleague of Joris. But from the science background. I studied mathematics, and I would never have imagined to like sit in a panel like this, or even like to see this technology actually develop so far that we can actually build these things. So it's really incredible in terms of a scientific history, like what has happened through the previous years. And I kind of want to make a little advertisement here of the professional's guide to quantum technology that some colleague of us have written in Amsterdam, and if you scan the QR code, you can actually get access to it. It's just a link to the website, which is also there in the corner. That tries to give a very accessible introduction to this technology, and without throwing formulas at you, explain how quantum computers work. And the way they work is fundamentally different from a conventional computer. Namely, they are based on qubits, quantum bits. Classical bits are kind of 0 and 1s, and qubits, they can be 0 and 1s at the same time. They can be in superposition of a 0 and 1. And they use some other kind of magical ingredients, like interference and entanglement, that are simply described by mathematics. So the kind of quantum mechanics tells us an accurate description of this very small scale phenomena in physics. And it turns out that we can use those to build computers. And I think that's what we're talking about here. One common kind of mistake that I've seen people making is assuming that all conventional computers like my laptop here will be replaced by quantum computers. So that's definitely not the case. You will always need classical computing devices to even control quantum computers. Quantum computers are very hard, big machines. Yeah, you need classical computers to control them. And classical computers are also very good. So they're very good at a lot of tasks. And it's actually very difficult to beat them, to kind of find ways to program these quantum computers in a way that they are doing things faster than classical conventional computers. And as Matthias mentioned, actually quantum computers are actually pretty slow. So, and that makes it difficult to beat classical computers. They're just like smart. They can do operations that we cannot do on conventional computers. And that's kind of these shortcuts that lead us to believe that we can actually get an advantage of using these machines. And I agree with Matthias that the biggest, most promising applications will be in the area of simulations of quantum mechanical systems. So this is the kind of quantum chemistry that Matthias was mentioning. But my own research is more on a different area, namely the impact on cryptography. So we know that Shor's algorithm, I think was already mentioned, is a way to actually break the currently used way of protecting, for instance, communication on the internet. So if we connect to a website from our browser that we've never kind of done before, then at the beginning of this, of the way of establishing a secure connection, we use so-called public key cryptography. And public key cryptography, the type that we use nowadays, is based on some mathematical problem, for instance, the factoring of large integer numbers. And this problem turns out to be possible to break with a quantum computer. And so when developing more powerful quantum machines, we will be able to break the currently used cryptography. And that is a problem. And I like the way you put it, Matthias, that, well, it's also easy to solve. We just have to upgrade our current cryptography. Turns out that that's maybe a bit more difficult than just that, and it might take a long time. So, but before getting into this, I would like to show you this graph, where to also give you an idea like where we stand in the development of a quantum computer. So there's a yearly survey taken among experts in quantum computing, maybe you might even be participating in this, where they ask, when do you think, so it's a very extremely well specified problem, when will a quantum computer be able to break the currently used, this RSA 2048 type of encryption within 24 hours? And they just ask experts like, in years from now, when will this happen? And they give probabilities, probability estimates. And you can see that, let's say if you look at the branch of like 15 years, then there's roughly half, like the optimistic half of the people think that, well, optimistic or pessimistic, but I mean, roughly half of the people think that, the experts think that quantum computers will be able to solve this challenge. And I think we have good hope that actually before this happens, before quantum computers can break cryptography, we can also do useful stuff with it. So the chemical simulations hopefully will happen before this happens. And this is kind of the doomsday, and we have to prepare for this. And as Matthias mentioned, so we should transition our current cryptography to something that is resistant against these quantum attacks. But unfortunately, so this is what we call quantum safe cryptography. Unfortunately, history has shown us that these transitions in cryptography, they take a long time. We can easily talk about decades. So there have been some previous examples where hash functions had to be replaced or encryption schemes had to be replaced. And that easily takes decades because, for instance, you have to replace hardware. Think of replacing all the bank cards that we're using, or all the access cards to these buildings have to be physically replaced. So software updates might be easier to do, but maybe also think of software in a car, for instance. So old cars, or even cars that are currently produced, maybe they're not that easy to upgrade. So this can easily take decades to do that. And fortunately, there's some efforts being made in this direction. In particular, we have, well, under the guidance of NIST, so that's the National Institute for Standards and Technology in the US, there's been a competition going, kind of figuring out what this new so-called post-quantum cryptography standard should be. And any moment now, we are expecting these standards to be published. So this process has come to an end. And then it's about implementing them, like putting things in practice. And I think a lot of effort has to be made in this direction. I think the US is in this sense ahead of us because there's been some presidential decree that all of the public administration has to be quantum safe by, I think, 2 years from now or so. So there's a lot of push in this direction. Whereas I'm still missing this a little bit on the European level. And so together with Bart Groothuis, who is a member of the European Parliament, we have been pushing for this a little bit, and he has kind of signed a letter because the legislation is basically there. There's the GDPR, there's NIS2, that requires appropriate security measures. But of course, what does that mean exactly? So we're basically asking the relevant players here, the Commission, the European Cybersecurity Institute, but also the European Data Protection Supervisor and the board to clarify what that means in the context of post-quantum cryptography. So I will leave it at this for the moment, and I'm happy to discuss.
Maybe just a quick follow-up question on this particular challenge of coming up with new algorithms in this space. You know, so, I mean, I've seen some like reporting that there's a candidate algorithm and then the candidate algorithm is actually apparently not very good. And it seems to me that sometimes there's just a handful of people that actually can really do that kind of hard work on understanding, you know, how vulnerable would these new algorithms be maybe to what you could do on a quantum computer also, or what you could do on a classical computer. It's like, in a way, my understanding is like the current system still relies on an assumption that like a particular mathematical problem is very, very difficult to solve. It may be that at some point, I mean, we're not expecting that, but the mathematics could suddenly turn out to be different. So, I mean, how do you organize trust in these communities, and how does that work in practice at the moment where you have these candidates and there's people that are working through potential attacks? Could you give a little bit of insight on that?
Yes, so that's a very good question. And indeed, this is a very difficult problem to solve. And I think we're trying our best in the sense that this is an international effort. And that is basically coordinated by NIST, but it is really the whole worldwide cryptography community is participating in these efforts, and in all respects. So that means they submit candidates for replacing the current systems. They have submitted those. There were something like roughly 100 proposals how to do this. And there were rounds of selection where then the same people that submitted this, they also tried to attack the system and break the other people's kind of submissions. And yeah, so the whole cryptographic community is participating in this. And then of course somebody has to take decisions in the end, but it's really those kind of 4 proposals that remain now after about 5 years of process. That's basically where we put our trust in. And of course we can still combine these as well with the existing systems. So it's we can arrange it in a way that an attacker has to break both the current cryptography and the new system in order to be successful.
thank you for that additional insight. And there may be further questions about that, maybe also later on. So let's turn to our final speaker, Aparna, for your opening remarks.
Hi, everyone. My name's Aparna, and I come to this from a slightly different vantage point. Quantum is not my rodeo. My rodeo is AI and AI governance. I primarily do a lot of thinking about and support for regulators. I most recently have done a bit of work with unions, thinking about generative AI, and I'm working on an ongoing project with a number of different agencies, including the Fundamental Rights Agency on remote biometric identification systems. So it's been interesting, I think, to take that lens and apply it to quantum computing. The primary project I've worked on was commissioned by Joris and the University of Amsterdam, and it was to look at quantum computing in the global south. And that was supported by Quantum Delta, NL. It was supported by Marika, who was an interviewee for the project. And I just realized was also supported by Matthias, because I attended one of your presentations and was really, that also was really helped shape my thinking. So the purpose of the brief and the project, which I'll speak about a little bit more, was to introduce different frames for analyzing the Global South and to support kind of a more dynamic view of how the Global South can access and will access quantum computing outside of the dominant paradigm, where that dominant paradigm is really the lens of US-China competition and the quantum quote-unquote arms race. And so the way we approached this project was by tracking quantum computing activity within the G77, especially research and academic activity and partnerships. And one of our primary contributions was a typology, which is very hefty, but don't worry, I'm going to walk you through it. So we basically categorize states based on how they will likely access quantum computing in the future based on current activity. And so there are three categories that we suggest. The first are build states. And so examples here are China, potentially India, potentially Singapore, which I can talk about a bit more. These are states that are looking to be first or early movers in developing sovereign quantum computing capabilities. They have the most active quantum computing ecosystems and activity that spans the quantum value chain. They typically have national quantum strategies and substantial public investment in R&D. The second group of states are what we call procure states. And this is a very speculative group because it depends on future supply chains and commercialization. But these are states that will pursue sovereign quantum computers by procuring hardware and software through strategic or commercial partnerships. And states within this category will likely have financing ability and strong diplomatic relationships with quantum computing providers, so the Group 1 states. But they won't necessarily have even or sufficiently mature domestic expertise across the stack, especially in hardware. So the UAE is one possible example of a procure state. It is currently developing a quantum computer in collaboration with Kilimanjaro, the Spanish startup. The third category is the largest category of states, so it's what we call cloud access states. And these are states that will be solely reliant on commercial cloud computing. Often these states have more diffuse quantum computing ecosystems and less government involvement. Their activity is often housed within universities and driven by key academics and departments. And these are states that will likely position themselves further along the quantum computing value chain. So one example of this is South Africa, who has said very explicitly in their quantum computing strategy that they will not focus on hardware. They just can't compete in terms of R&D and capital investment, and will instead focus on leveraging software development capabilities. So all the countries that are listed on that slide have some documented quantum computing activity, whether it's through a university department or research or teaching, and all of those with asterisks have known commercial cloud computing access. So very quickly, I can just talk through what we see in terms of current quantum cloud computing access. So across the Global South, we have like standard access to what I call dominant industry players. So you have Microsoft Azure, AWS, Google Cloud. IBM in particular seems to have an especially large footprint in the Global South through its Q network. But we also see new startups. So many of the companies in that second row have partnerships with large incumbent providers, but they also have direct relationships with customers within the Global South. So Qatar has a partnership with Xanadu Computing. The UAE has a partnership with IonQ. Pascal, which is a French quantum computing startup, is interesting because one of its investors is essentially Aramco, which is Saudi Arabia's state-owned petroleum company, through its investment arm. And as a part of the deal, Aramco will also access the company's platform. And interestingly, I would say, in parallel, we also looked briefly at Chinese cloud computing activity. And Chinese cloud providers do not seem to be taking the same tack when it comes to offering like exploratory quantum cloud services internationally. And so most of the providers whom we did look at were US and European based. But ultimately, I'd say, and this is something we can talk about more, like all commercial providers can restrict access, right? They have terms of use. Sometimes these are guided by export control targets, but not fully. And so even within this, there are some interesting dynamics. So for instance, when we checked, IBM services were not available to those resident in Qatar. But separately, Qatar does have this partnership with Xanadu Computing. So one of the most obvious questions, I think, are what are the potential impacts of the current cloud computing marketplace for quantum access globally? And how could this new technology reinforce existing infrastructure and challenges and dynamics? But that's just like one area, and I think of many that we can turn to more in the discussion. So thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Aparna. So I think like maybe we can do a little discussion on a few like questions that I have, but like I think also like you can start also signaling that you have questions yourself. I think there's someone that will be able to hand you a mic. So I mean I maybe have a first question I have is like on the governance question. On this question of like how to govern this space and how to govern in this space. Like, so how much of that is also, I mean, we're now in a phase where we're doing preparatory thinking mostly. Like we're thinking about like how can we govern in this space, how we deal with quantum computers when they would become powerful enough. So But that creates a very particular kind of dynamic. It's like quite an open space. It's kind of, like we can imagine things are like we can debate relatively freely, perhaps, and the technology is in the meantime being developed. How much are the dynamics in this debate and in the kind of governance dynamics, how much of that is that going to switch, and how is that going to change when we suddenly have maybe real breakthroughs and these machines that are fault tolerant and there are real world kind of commercial applications. So I'm curious how you think then suddenly the world like of quantum computing governance is going to flip, and maybe even though we've done a lot of preparatory thinking, there's maybe certain dangers that things may be flipping in a wrong direction or not, or like what is your assessment of like how that is going to work out when maybe in 5 or 10 years we have these machines that are no longer just exploratory, but real world commercial or state use kind of impact? Marieke.
Yeah, I think here there's several, if we assume that we still have, let's say, 10, 15 years, the preparatory work is important, and also to help to support policymakers in understanding what are the concrete impacts or possible impact on their constituents of the technology. So bring clarity on where quantum computing might make a difference is very important, but not in a technological approach, but more like how will society, economies, and geopolitics be impacted? So bringing clarity is the very first level. It's a condition as well to raise awareness so that policymakers actually understand why they should care now. But the second level is also to differentiate or to understand what is the state of play of the current multilateral governance that actually applies to quantum computing. So what are the pieces of the governance, the mechanisms and instruments that will apply to quantum computing but already exist, and where there are gaps in the governance where new pieces of legislation, regulation, or other types of mechanism should be developed. So that's what, at least it's the approach, a pragmatic approach that we have started with this group of nation states. First, bring clarity on why they should care. Second, because it impacts their constituents. And second is understanding what is the current state of play and what is specific to quantum computing that needs to be discussed separately. And I think Matthias has the same kind of understanding of what is specific to quantum and what is not.
Yeah, so I view things slightly different, and you like to debate with me here. And there are two aspects here. One is around the crypto threat that was mentioned. And there the knee-jerk reaction is imposing export control. Nobody from outside the EU can get it. Nobody from outside the US can get it. That will not keep us safe. That will just prevent the good applications. And that's where we look ahead to 10 years and 15 years, what will be the positive impact. And we want that to be accessible globally, including the global south, as mentioned. There's a change in thinking there as we understand that we have ways of upgrading the crypto, and just stopping access will not stop the threat by bad actors. So I think that goes in the right way. Where I see a danger is if we say that kind of the threat is only 15 years out. Because even on the crypto side, if you intercept a message now, when we have a quantum computer, maybe in 15 years, we'll be able to decrypt this. So the threat is here now if you want to keep a secret for longer. Medical data, trade secrets, state secrets. So the threat is here now in some way. And when we then go to where the application is in chemistry, chemistry is dual use. And we don't have to wait for the breakthroughs in quantum computing because we have breakthroughs today with AI in that space. So we need the governance now. And that is a case where I view that this shiny object of quantum in the future, this safe thing, we don't have to worry now because it's still a decade out, distracts us from the challenge we face today in the same application domain. So we have to start now because it's imminent.
Aparda?
Yeah, I can jump in. I think like at the highest level, there will be like the same pace of like governance that you see in with other types of technologies. And you'd see like principles, non-binding instruments, voluntary commitments, and then at a certain point of like technical maturity, then there would be like regulation. And I'd say we're at the early stage of that, and you have like World Economic Forum principles, things like that. But to like Matthias's point, I agree. Like I think it can be something of a red herring to think of quantum computing as something abstract that exists in the future. Like I think there are lots of contemporary dynamics that can be regulated now that will like really impact how countries, individuals access that computing in the future, quantum computing in the future. And I think cloud is one piece of it. But there are other aspects, so like, semiconductor policies right now, critical raw materials policies right now, that shape like the geopolitical angle, but can also inform other aspects. I will say like one thing that I find quite positive is I don't remember having conversations like this about AI, previously. And I think there is something interesting that there might be lessons that we're taking from other types of technologies and applying here at an early stage.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think also, I mean, personally, I also feel like that's the way to go, to think in terms of continuities, in terms of like, I mean, not to kind of single out also in an abstract manner, like very particular kind of technology, you know, like, and without looking at like where it's coming from, how is it produced, how is it going to fit into the broader kind of digital ecosystem. So maybe just like before moving to the audience for questions, the final question, and we kind of got to that already maybe a little bit, is we do see already now in this very early phase of development, we see a lot of, you know, let's say securitization of the space. You know, and I think, you know, I have one PhD student, for instance, also that is looking at this question of like, you know, how is law, in particular new areas of law, are they constraining or shaping innovation, but also constraining it? We see a lot of new policies, you know, like in the area of knowledge security, in the area of investment screening, in the area also of export controls on particular technologies. But it's not only technology, but it's also knowledge related to technology that export control can apply to. So already in this very early phase, but in many ways is still fundamental research, you know, like labs, also in universities, you know, but of course also in the industry are confronted with like rather hefty, you know, forms of regulation, you know, like, so could you maybe, those of you that have some like maybe position on that or some experience on that, you know, share your view on those developments.
It's building a quantum computer is hard. If you understand like what it is and what it can do, then you're unique. We all are still struggling with finding out kind of what it can do and how to build it. And we need the best global talent. No country alone will be able to build a quantum with that scale. So we need to open borders. We need the global talent here. But at the same time, we need to develop it in a way that is safe. So I think that is the tension here, that we need to open borders and we need security around it. And that's where we have to find the right compromise. And with one threat being really the crypto threat, the way to resolve the tension might be to just accelerate the transition to quantum safe cryptography, because then the threat is lessened. Then we can keep the borders more open. Do you have a comment to that? Yeah.
Yeah, I very much support that idea. Great. Sure. As a scientist, again, well, as former mathematician, it's a little bit scary because I'm used to like fundamental research, and so in that sense, very low TRL. No? So like we would publish papers, and so just the idea of like restricting our ability to cooperate with other scientists from wherever kind of feels quite scary, I must say. Somehow it's a new world where we ended up in, and yeah, it's I can understand that somehow this has to be protected once we move to higher technology readiness levels, but for the lower ones, I really hope we stay open and accessible. I think there's a question up there. I don't know if you get.
We'll get to the audience in a second. I see Marike also wanted to react.
No, just echoing what Christian was saying. Just when this discussion started at JESDA, it was JESDA always starts with the consulting scientists. That kind of our take on this, so that we understand the scientific substance before we bring into governance. And the very raison d'être of the Open Quantum Institute was that exactly that. Scientists being worried that they would be prevented from collaborating internationally, that would in turn prevent them to realize the potential of the technology. And we have, very precise and pragmatic examples as how the collaboration stops happening because of governance or political considerations.
Okay, well, thanks for that, and then let's open it up for questions. You had a question, and could I see any other hands of like if there are other questions. Okay, not yet, but maybe there'll be.
Yes, hi. My name is Joran. I work for CPDP, but I'm also affiliated with KU Leuven Faculty of Social Sciences for a project on international relations. I'll ask my question first, and then I'll kind of try to set the stage for an answer. You can agree with it or not. Afterwards, in the context of a research project that I'm part of. So, we've spoken about multilateralism, international cooperation being necessary, open borders. What, in your experience, is actually the current state of play of international cooperation in the governance of quantum technology or quantum computing? And the reason why I'm asking is because this research project, Reigniting Multilateralism Through Technology, that I'm part of, we're coming to some, or in my view, some cynical views about the current state of international cooperation on technology, in that multilateralism isn't such a useful explanatory concept anymore. We're looking at empire more to explain. Bradford is an example, but for even the EU, for obvious reasons, it's a more explanatorily viable concept in international relations when it comes to technology governance right now. And part of that reason is that empires block each other. They try to hinder each other from developing technologies, trade routes, supply chains. So again, my question is, what is the current state of play of international cooperation in the governance of quantum technology? Would you share this view that maybe international cooperation is on the decline also within this sector?
Reply and then let also the scientists reply. What I can tell you is my return on experience from this very practical exercise that we've been through for the past 3 years in conceptualizing the Open Quantum Institute. So the starting point was that indeed international collaboration was difficult and was getting more and more difficult, as I said earlier. And so to try and find a way around it and revitalize a bit multilateralism, what the task force decided is first that the Open Quantum Institute would not cover the security, cryptography use cases and applications. So that, and instead would focus on, again, sustainable development goals types of applications. So that was one way to find common ground, because the SDG framework is one that all nation states have endorsed. The second way that we have circumvented this obstacle, hoping that we could go back, is that the focus of the Open Quantum Institute is on building applications. So it's not at all about building hardware. It's only marginally about actually inventing completely novel software or algorithms. It's about leveraging the existing science to find those applications. So in this context, the way we are approaching this at the moment in this phase where Open Quantum Institute is being piloted is also that we will tackle those applications through scientific domains that are users of quantum computing. So going to meet and curate discussions between, for example, UN organizations and scientists of material sciences, and then only after that bring in quantum scientists in the loop. So, but I agree with you. Obviously, multilateralism at the moment is not in the best shape, and that's also why JESDA was created, to find other ways to revitalize the multilateral system.
Yeah, so I'd like to take a step back here and look at the broader picture. And I think I agree with parts of what you said here. But I say at the level of the scientists working together, there's no problem. At the level of companies recruiting global talent, that still works. Although there are problems now that, for example, we cannot have Russian citizens work on quantum technology, which causes problems. Yeah, so there are things coming, and where it comes from is partially, I'd say, a fear of the threat to crypto. National security risk that people don't understand deeply, and then the knee-jerk reaction is export control. Let's not give anybody but our citizen access to it. That's not really effective. It will just stop us from building things for the good use. And that's where the education about kind of how do we mitigate the crypto threat, how do we upgrade our crypto, I think is important. And moving fast to quantum safe crypto. But then the other aspect, as you said, is indeed empire building. With the lack of clarity that most people have about what quantum can do, people think quantum is this amazing technology that whoever controls it will be the global winner. Then every country for itself wants it for their citizen only in their country. That's why there are so many quantum deltas, quantum valleys, quantum valley here, quantum valley there, kind of people thinking that essentially whoever builds it will be the next like Silicon Valley and dominate the world. And with that, indeed, there is the tendency towards empire building, coming from that lack of understanding that this will essentially stop it, because no country alone will be able to build it. And so that's why what we thought what we have to do, and what we started with Chester and the OQI, is we need to show that there are global applications, that there are an application that we need for the good of the planet. So we want to see what is there that's good for the SDGs. And with that, build a coalition of countries, including the global south, that say, yes, we need that for the planet to counter the empire building. It starts by building coalitions. Then with that coalition that we're starting to build here, one can then start talking about the global multilateral governance, and that's why we have the panel here, that we start the conversations.
I'll also maybe just like share a few examples from our work that might be useful, I think, for your research. So one, like I generally agree, like at a higher level with that sentiment. I do think that a lot of knowledge sharing does take place based on geopolitical relationships and allies. And so, for instance, we looked at India and we looked at Singapore, both of whom have access to like certain US institutions and consortium like QEDC and like the Chicago Quantum Exchange, where Indian scientists and Singaporean scientists can interact with Americans in that way, and that's like facilitated by a bilateral relationship. But the second was we did look a little bit at BRICS as well, which is like an interesting, organization and has expressed some interest in technology governance. They have an AI working group ongoing right now, and there have been like murmurs around interest in quantum as well. And so that's an interesting, this actually supports like a certain vision of like a world with two poles, but still, I thought that was an interesting example. And the last point is, again, it's probably a little too early to say, but I think there are potentially other actors that could come into play in relation to quantum computing and the supply chain. And again, we're so far away from the tech having any kind of maturity to be able to say that with any confidence. But it is, and I've heard this expressed, that like certain countries might have access to critical raw materials and leverage their position in the supply chain to kind of gain access further along the quantum value chain. And that's like an interesting, I think, geopolitical angle as well.
Are there further questions in the room? Maybe I'll ask, like, maybe I'll just go for a final question for the panelists, and then we can round it off for the evening. So, yeah, maybe just, I mean, I think, you know, it's very clear that a lot like still needs to happen in this space. If you would like focus people's attention on one really issue in particular, maybe with maybe some specific recommendation, what would it be? You know, what is the one thing that people should keep like putting their attention to in this space, and what would be your recommendation? So maybe I start with you, Matthias.
So when we were thinking about that, kind of how can we govern the use of new technology that is sensitive and intrinsically dual use, then the challenge we face here is that just from looking at what the customer does or what the user does, we cannot tell the intent. Because, for example, the intent of a cancer drug is to kill. The intent of a chemical weapon is to kill. You cannot really tell it from the calculations you perform on the quantum computer. So the only way we currently see that it can be done is through a know your customer process. We have to understand and govern the users and the use cases, and we need to come together and find out what are the use cases we find acceptable, who are the users we think should have access globally, and what are the use cases that we do not like to see. We do it the nuclear technology. There's easier because there what you build for weapons is different from what you build for the power generation. Here it's just the same piece of a software running, so it has to be more KYC based is our thinking.
Thank you. Marika, good.
No, I'm thinking what is really hard in our work, and it's really what is really hard in everything that what the Open Quantum Institute does is to explore those applications, and so it's more cool to all the bright minds here in the room and further to come and join this coalition so that we can together find what the real applications are, and then illustrate the good we can do with the technology, so we can raise the interest of policymakers as well as to why we should govern this technology in a different way, and not just by banning access to specific geographies. So understanding the use, but again, so hard, really hard at this stage of the technology.
Yes, of course, from my point of view, the closest to my heart is the transition to post-quantum cryptography, which I was very happy to hear that you mentioned it several times, because it seems to speed up the process and facilitate the process of focusing on useful and applications of quantum computing even further. So for this purpose, I think it's most important to raise awareness. So to kind of make sure governments, but also companies, are aware of the problem, and they start. And there's now handbooks. There's steps you can follow already now to kind of make an inventory of where in your services you use cryptography and what kind of impact it would have, once it gets broken. And based on such a risk analysis, actually take the next step. So when the new standards are out, to kind of make sure this transition goes as smoothly and as quickly as possible.
I would say even at this phase, it is interesting to start thinking about dependencies and begin mapping those out. And so looking at how technical dependencies are embedded, potentially like across the stack. What are the embedded talent requirements, expertise requirements in the future? How would this impact switching costs, if at all? And I think even at this preliminary stage, there is interesting work to do there that could ensure potentially future interoperability.
Thank you for all of that. That was a very rich panel and discussion. I hope you enjoyed it too. I think, for myself, I will just add also one thing, that I think is in the end very interesting in the space also for me. I come from a legal and law and policy kind of perspective on this, and we tend to kind of look at technology from a regulatory kind of perspective and start to then evaluate applicable law at the moment that we know the applications, at the moment that we really see the technology being kind of used in the real world and starting to generate applications. And for me, the attraction of this space was that we're clearly not there yet. So I thought one thing that really attractive then is that we can start imagining things, we can start thinking about it and also asking the bigger questions, also looking at the kind of continuities we have. I mean, we're talking about computing, how to govern computing, the bigger question when thinking about quantum. But I think I also realized, and I wasn't really expecting that, how exciting it is to already look at all sorts of law and policy dynamics related to just the production phase of the technology, just the innovation phase. And I think maybe partly for reasons that were explored earlier in the back and forth with the question from the audience, there's really a lot happening, legally speaking, policy-wise, in this very, very early phase. And that is also something that's exciting and also needs a lot of thinking and needs a lot of research. So thanks everybody for joining today. Maybe join me in a round of applause for the speakers and then we'll close.